In this video, I'm going to give you an in-depth look at the Sony G Master 100-400 telephoto lens. Now, I've had this lens for a few months, so I've been able to really test it and push it to its limits. In this video, I'm going to cover things like the build quality, the performance of the lens, as well as the value. But hey, first, I want to say welcome back, guys. I hope you're all well, and if you haven't seen any of my videos before, my name's Eric. I'm Eric in the Wild, and I do a lot of photo and video content. So if you're into that, give me a thumbs up, think about subscribing, and I have a lot of good stuff in the pipeline just waiting for you. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. You'll find a series of switches on this 100-400. On the top, you have the autofocus, the manual focus switch. And under that, you'll have the switch which switches from full to 3 meters to infinity. Now, this is pretty useful if you know you're going to be shooting something that's far away. Then you would keep it on this 3 meters to infinity setting. However, if you want to shoot macro or anything really up close, then you would go into the full mode. This basically just helps the software with your lens and your camera communicate and better use the autofocus capability. Now, the third switch is the steady shot. Now, you can just switch this on and off right here, which is particularly useful if you're shooting on a tripod. Lastly, you have mode 1 and 2, which are directly related to this steady shot setting. In mode 1 is general use. You'll pretty much always have it on mode 1. That is, unless you are panning. Then you would go to mode 2. This could be if you're tracking a bird in flight, you're tracking a car, or anything that's moving really horizontally. On the other side, Sony decided to go away from the lens hold switch, and they use a smooth to tight variable ring. Now, the tight is good when you're walking around, it doesn't fall out, but it is a bit tight to move the zoom ring. However, I keep it mostly on tight, and that's because if I have it on smooth, the lens creeps out, and that's kind of unfortunate. But maybe if you're on a tripod or something and you want easy one-handed zoom capability, then you could put it on smooth, but for all intents and purposes, I tend to keep mine towards the tight side. On top of all this, Sony outfitted us with some special AR coating on the lens, which really helps with ghosting and flare. And on the lens hood, we have a fancy little door, which better helps us access our filters and polarizers. On top of that, you get 3 customizable buttons around the lens barrel, which you can use for things like focus hold or switching into different modes. And in terms of weather sealing, Sony added a rubber gasket on the back of the lens, which really helps with that water resistance. So I would say the build quality of this lens is pretty solid. Literally, this thing is a beast, but it's also compact enough that it's not so obtrusive when you want to carry it around. I find I can take this easily on hikes and not mind the weight. But what about the performance? Well, first off, this lens, as you might know, is between 100 and 400 millimeter focal length. Now, if you have something like the A7R3 or R4 or any of the Rs, you'll have this APS-C mode, which are also on the A7 III, etc. But in another video, I covered that APS-C mode is quite useful in the Rs, more so than on the 7 series. So that's why I am particularly talking about the Rs for this. If you bump into that APS-C mode, this lens now becomes 150 to 600. Now that is a huge expansive focal range, and as I said, you get some high quality shots still in this APS-C mode. So for something that is only this size and weighs 1.3 kilograms, it is really good. One of the strengths of the Sony system is its autofocus, so you won't be surprised when you find out that the autofocus paired with the 100-400 is great. That means you can really nail birds in flight, moving objects, or anything like this. You really won't have a problem using this telephoto lens in combination with Sony's great autofocus system. Now, what is even cooler is the minimal focal distance. Now, it is within 1 meter. That's about 3 feet. Think about that. You can zoom in 400 millimeters and take a picture 3 feet away. That gives you some great macro opportunities, which makes this lens even more versatile than it already is. And you have to think about competitor telephoto lenses often have a minimal focal distance of 5, 6, 7 feet. So this is really impressive what Sony was able to do with this lens. And given the nice compression that you'll find at 400 millimeters, at f5.6, you're able to get some really beautiful bokeh. Now, that allows for some opportunities to use this lens in things like lifestyle or fashion, of course, traveling as well. This lens is a really great all-arounder, and that is on top of it being a dedicated wildlife lens. But what about its sharpness? Now, I've had some experience with some other telephoto lenses. For instance, I started with the good old Tamron 500mm mirror lens. This thing is so small and compact, and it's at 500 millimeters. Now, the thing is, it's a mirror lens, and some of you might know, with a mirror lens you get some very, very characteristic bokeh. Now, a lot of people don't like it, but I find it kind of artistic in some way. Now, it also is, of course, manual focus, which is another problem altogether. But I grew up using this one, and hey, I really, really enjoy it. Now, this lens is pretty sharp and only costs about $100. So how can you justify the $2,500 price tag? That's 25 times more. On top of this lens, I've also had some experience with the Contax Zeiss 100 to 300. Now, this lens is also an antique classic. It's from the 1987, but it is sharp as can be. I would even argue that it is potentially sharper than the 100 to 400 in many situations. I'm going to take you guys in now with some photo comparisons between these three lenses, and we can see for ourselves. This is the 100 to 400 from Sony versus that 100 to 300 Contax Zeiss. Now, the focal point was up here on this moss region. And if we zoom in there, right away you can tell that it's not so much a difference here. But if we go up, you can see that there is a little more sharpness in this area than there is in this area. Maybe here, I don't know, they're pretty similar. If we go down a little bit, you can see that perhaps even it's a bit sharper in this area. So all in all, I would say it's pretty close between these two lenses. But if we flip over to the mirror lens and we zoom into that same region, now we can see some apparent differences in the sharpness of the 100 to 400 to the mirror lens. So it is clear that the 100 to 400 is sharper than the mirror lens, which is to be expected. Like I said, you have that 25 times price difference. With all that said, the Zeiss 100 to 300 definitely held up better to the 100 to 400, and I'd say, though I would give the edge to the 100 to 400, it was pretty close. Now, with that said, if we take a look at 100 millimeters, both wide open 4.5 at ISO 160, the results might surprise you here. So if we zoom in a ton to this arm of the chair, you can totally make out the scratches and things like this. However, you can see perhaps that on the 100 to 300, you get a little more fine detail there, and that is that Zeiss micro contrast, that Zeiss sharpness that really is coming with this lens, and it's known to be extremely sharp at 100 and 200 millimeters. So with that said, the Sony does hold up pretty well to it, and I would say that the difference is not so noticeable, but perhaps there is a little bit more micro contrast in the Zeiss, and we even get a little bonus fly here for us. So as you see, sharpness isn't the thing that you should get the 100 to 400 for. Granted, it is a sharp lens, and it's as sharp or better than both of the lenses I just showed you. But granted, again, it has a price tag of either 25 times more in the case of the mirror lens, or say 5 times more in the case of the Contax Zeiss. What it does offer is a range of things like autofocus, built-in stabilization, which is also very helpful for video. For instance, look at this video with the stabilization off. And then, if I turn the stabilization back on, let's check out another example. Stabilization off, and the stabilization on. So you can really see that using the stabilization of this lens, you're able to pull out some shots that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get. Combine that with your autofocus system and you have a really high quality lens here. Now, the mirror lens also has the disadvantage of being locked in at 500 millimeters. Now this, of course, is a bit more flexible. The Zeiss is also flexible, but it only goes up to 300 millimeters. And what I found particularly annoying about the Contact Zeiss was that I had to change my focal length always within my camera to get the built-in stabilization of the 7R3. Now, of course, the Sony lenses talk natively to the Sony cameras, so you can avoid this problem altogether. Is it worth the price that you must pay for it? Remember, I told you it is quite more expensive than these other lenses. But if you want the most high quality, highest performing telephoto lens for the Sony system, then this is simply your choice. You can combine this with the 1.4 or the 2x extenders and really expand your range. If you are a shooter who's looking to take a few telephoto type shots every once in a while, maybe this wouldn't be your choice. As I just showed, you can get a quite sharp telephoto lens that is not native to Sony and produce the same sharpness that you would find with this Sony lens. So this is really for people who are looking for an all-in-one versatile lens that you can go from wildlife, you can do macro, you can do portrait, you can do pretty much anything with this lens, and it's not so heavy where it's going to be so strenuous for you to carry it around on a day-to-day basis. I take this lens with me almost every day when I go walking in the forest, and I'm almost never disappointed with the results I get from it. So yes, it is an expensive lens, but it's an investment in you and your photography. So if you're at that level where you feel that you can make that investment, then hey, go for it. You'll enjoy it. And if you don't like it, you can always resell it. These lenses are at such high quality that you're not going to lose much money on the resale used market. Now, you can even pick one up used and cut your losses even more if you ever do decide to sell it in the future. In conclusion, if you want the best, highest performing telephoto lens for your Sony camera without price being part of your equation, then this is it. I mean, you can shoot wildlife with this, you can shoot macro, you can shoot portraits, traveling, you can shoot so many different situations with this lens that it's really great. And the second thing is that because this is a native lens, it brings a lot of advantages with that. Not only does it talk to your camera so you don't have to worry about things like setting your focal length, etc., but also you get to tap into Sony's great autofocus system. Now that's something that you wouldn't get with the other two telephoto lenses that I gave you examples of. I think another great plus of this is that it's compact enough to carry without bringing so much strain. That's really important to me because I go hiking, I walk with this for miles and miles, and I don't want it to be so strenuous where I kind of dread taking it along with me. Well, actually the contrary, I look forward to taking this with me, and I think that the range that it brings is well worth the weight and the size of this lens. And I think the last thing is that, yeah, it's pricey, but hey, it delivers, and as I said, you can often get your money back if you ever do decide to sell it down the road. From me, it definitely gets my recommendation. If you guys thought this video was helpful, consider giving me a thumbs up, consider subscribing. As I said, I have a lot of good videos in the pipeline. If you think someone else will find this video helpful, feel free to share it. I guess that's what we're all here for, is just sharing our knowledge and helping each other become better photographers and better people. I hope you guys are all doing all right, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time.